This is a story about getting focused and creative. It's a handbook, if you will, a guidebook that is all about your brain and what current brain science tells us about how to relax, how to thrive, even how to work better with others. The author is a cognitive scientist who is just intent on turning good science into really good life strategies. I'm really excited for you to meet author Therese Houston. But before we do that, a quick and relevant side note about this episode's sponsor. You know that old saying, don't work harder, work smarter. Well, for me, this episode's sponsor, Pozotron, is all about working smarter. They are an audiobook prep and proofing subscription service that narrators like me, producers, publishers use to help them do their jobs better. Pozotron saves me time on crucial quality control issues. It listens back to my audio and tells me exactly where I have made a mistake so that I can quickly correct it. I think that even though in this last 5 years, the audiobook industry clearly has just exploded, enormous growth, right? But honestly, sometimes it still feels like a small community of artists. And to me, I think that the Pozotron team cares very deeply about being part of that community. Sponsoring this episode is a great example of that. And I often feel like Pozotron is invested in my success, helping me be better at my job. So reach out if you're interested in knowing how I use Pozotron, or visit them at pozotron.com to get a free demo. Check out what they do if you're in the audio production world. Okay, so let's get into the conversation with Therese Houston and her new book, Sharp, 14 Simple Ways to Improve Your Life with Brain Science. We're going to start by each of us talking about why we do what we do for work. I had worked with someone in the newsroom, a weatherman actually, a classic bow tie wearing, adorable little weatherman from the 90s. And he was retired and he kept sending me little notes about how I just wish you'd start auditioning. I think you could do audiobooks. I think you could do, and it was just, you should get into podcasting. So it was just this combination of people in my life being like, why are you doing that? And so, yeah, so I started the audiobooks first and found myself wanting to talk to the authors before, during, and after I was recording. I was like, this is interesting. Why did this fiction, nonfiction, all the genres? So sort of that curiosity bug that probably led me into journalism to begin with was still there, kind of was reawoken. And I've had enormous fun talking to authors. It's just
so fun.
My own personal little book club. So thanks for participating. Thanks for being willing. It has, whatever tiny little spotlight I have, the podcast world is enormous. But I'm trying to be also just really thoughtful with how I use my voice. Where do you shine your light? How do you use your voice to amplify something? And so the projects that I choose and the episodes that I decide to feature are I'm trying to be really mindful and thoughtful. So anyway, that's enough about me. Okay, so I did want to start off by letting you talk a little bit about your expertise in this area, right? Like what qualifies you to write a book about how to improve our lives with brain science?
Well, I started studying neuroscience when I was getting my PhD in psychology. So I have an MS, Master's of Science, and a PhD in cognitive psychology, which is studying cognitive psychology, is studying how attention works, how memory works, how decision-making works, and neuroscience. Wow. Yeah, so it's great stuff. But it did, when I was initially doing it, we weren't necessarily looking at the brain. But by year 2 of my program, there was enough good neuroscience on some of the topics I was interested in that I began to take neuroscience seminars. And then my first teaching was in neuroscience. So I've been doing neuroscience since the early 90s. And at that point, neuroscience wasn't very helpful. Let's just put it that way. It was basically, I make the analogy in the book that it was like the Wright brothers days of neuroscience, where we just needed to make sure it was safe enough to put someone in an MRI scanner for an
Mm,
extended period of time. Is that going to be too stressful? I don't know if you've ever been in an MRI, but it can be
yes, claustrophobic.
claustrophobia. Yeah, really claustrophobic. And so they needed to figure out how, now there are open MRIs, and so that's a possibility.
Oh,
But
really? Wow.
yeah, oh yeah. If you ever get an opportunity, do one of those because it's a
Wow.
completely different experience. In any case, so that's my, I guess, my pedigree in neuroscience. And then for a long time, neuroscience wasn't helpful. Like I said, it was just they were just trying to kind of get all their ducks in a row. But just in the past decade, it became really applicable to everyday people. It was useful to patients there for a while before it became useful to everyone else. But now neuroscientists are looking at really practical things like how does tea help your thinking? How can you get better focused? How can you improve your memory? They're asking really great questions. And so it was exciting to dig into what other researchers were doing and try to pull on the threads of the best research that's out there and turn it into really practical strategies that people can use in the middle of a busy workday.
Yes, and this is, while absolutely rooted in current science, extremely conversational. Like, I
Mm,
think you're very good at, you are yourself,
mm,
not necessarily behind a lectern.
mm,
I think that's a really powerful way for science, for the public to be able to access the kind of science that we're talking about when you say it's brain science. And so
mm,
I found the book very personable.
mm,
You actually use personal anecdotes
mm.
from your own life. And I think that's a great way of making the reader or the listener feel like they know you, that they're just in a conversation with a friend.
Thank you. I really worked hard on that. I find that the research indicates that if you weave neuroscience into something, people will pay more attention to it, even if they don't understand it. So on the one
Yeah.
hand, it has this seductive quality, like it's almost like a magic show. Ooh, what's going to happen next? A little trick. But on the other hand, I find that neuroscientists often that I think they're trying to have an allegiance to their fellow neuroscientists, so they're used to talking in jargon, and so they won't
Yeah.
quite let go of that. So they're trying to be accessible, but they might start that way, but then they quickly drop back into the familiar jargon, familiar to their colleagues, not familiar to everyone else. And so I really wanted to make it the kind of thing that I would have wanted to read when I was just wondering if neuroscience was at all interesting. So I tried hard to take a beginner's mind approach to this and make it
Mm.
something because I think that there are so many interesting things about the brain and the mind, and I want to share that love, that passion. I don't know if you're familiar, there's an American author and theologian, Frederick Buechner, if I'm pronouncing that right, Buechner. But anyway, I love the way he talks about a person's calling is the place where your deep gladness meets the world's deep hunger.
Oh,
Isn't that
that's
nice?
good.
Gives you
Yeah.
chills, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
And
let's say that again. Wait. So your calling is where your curiosity, your
your
deep
meets
gladness.
deep gladness meets the world's deep hunger.
Mm. Yeah,
We
I
all want,
do.
yeah, right. And
I like that.
I think you've found that in your ability to use your voice, and I'm trying to find it and helping people connect with neuroscience.
Yeah, I love that. So this book in the title or in the subtitle is 14 Simple Ways. How did you hone in on 14?
And it's really 14 chapters. My editors were like, Teresa, there's really close to 50 ways, if not more than 50. But
Yeah.
I, I wanted to make it 14 different topics. So, we talk about it. One chapter's on attention. There's two chapters on stress, one on acute
Yes.
stress in the moment versus chronic stress, which is ongoing. And the way that I settled on 14 is as I was reading the literature, I was like, is there enough here for me to feel comfortable sharing it as well as practical enough to be helpful? And so there were some
Mm.
topics, and there was a third criteria, which is would I be willing to do this myself? So,
Ah,
right,
yeah.
there are some things, for instance, the chapter on dopamine, there's a chapter on kind of cold water or a cold exposure.
Yeah.
And, I even point out, I've tried the cold showers. I know they help with dopamine. I can't go there. So here are alternatives, right? I know there are
Yeah.
some people who can stand under a cold shower for 60 seconds. Good for them. What would be an alternative for those of us who find that untenable?
Yes. Okay, so that's a really good point. So the 14 in the title is referencing how you've sort of divided things up, but each one of these categories is kind of a gold mine
Mm,
of within the chapter, there are sort of subchapters of things you're sort of highlighting. So yeah, it probably is closer to like you're getting maybe 50, as you said, different um, helpful sort of tips and explanations through brain chemistry of why those are helpful tips. One of the things that I found most fascinating about it was, and you'll have to forgive me because I actually don't remember which number or chapter this is
oh,
in,
it's fine.
but you talked about placebo effects, and it was in the context of a doctor's office visit. And this was placebo, not necessarily as I've ingested something as a patient that has a placebo
Right.
effect, but I am in the presence of, from the moment I walk in their office, the
Mm,
effect that their office vibe
mm-hmm.
has on me, and that can be a placebo in itself. I just, can you please talk about that a little bit? Because I found that I hadn't ever even considered the effects of on my brain and then my physical being of
Mm,
feeling comfortable somewhere or feeling
mm-hmm.
like that person is trustworthy. That's
Yes,
essentially what this is, right?
it is. Have you ever had that experience where you go to a doctor and all of a sudden you're like, you know what, the pain's not so bad.
Yeah,
Because you're sitting in that office and you're like, actually, my hip is okay. Now I feel like I've overstated it, I've exaggerated it.
right.
And that would actually be because you trust this doctor. It's an environment that feels your body's actually releasing, there's a good chance your body's releasing endogenous opioids. We have an opioid crisis in this country that's exogenous, external opioids, but
External.
your body produces opioids that will reduce pain. And if you're in an office, a situation where you feel a lot of trust and the other person has a lot of competency,
Yes.
yes, the person has to feel both. The person has to be both warm and competent. So those two things is what
Yes.
the researchers are finding. So
Yeah.
let's just back up a little. So placebo effect, they get a bad rap. People say, oh, it's just in your head. If there's a placebo
Right.
effect, they somehow think it's just in your
It's
head.
fake. It's
It's
fake. It's a
fake. All
fake
right.
thing. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
if if your mom is having migraines and she happens to get a placebo and the migraines go away, people will be like, oh, you never really had migraines, mom.
It's very
But it's
invalidating. A placebo can
very
feel like an invalidating thing. Yes.
exactly. It can feel very invalidating. Instead, the way to think about a placebo effect, is it means that your brain has mechanisms to treat yourself, and they're being activated by either the treatment or by a set of circumstances. So
Yeah.
basically your brain can do a lot of healing. Now, if your appendix is about to burst, you should not rely on your brain to solve that. You need to get to a
True.
hospital right away. So
To
it's not.
clarify, there are certain conditions that will not be solved, but could still be positively impacted.
Yes, yes. And in fact, I had the
Yeah.
experience. I was in the hospital. I was in a doctor's office once with pain that I thought was concerned was my appendix. And sitting in the doctor's office, I'm like, you know what? I've exaggerated this. It's not so bad. Maybe this was ridiculous. But thank goodness they did a scan and they found out, no, your appendix is about to burst. We need to do surgery. So thank goodness I didn't
Yeah.
haul out of there and say, oh, not a big deal. So in any case, so it's basically you're activating brain mechanisms, and it's not just for pain. There are placebo effects. Your brain can help you recover from IBS. It can help
Mm.
you recover from an allergic reaction. There are so
Mm.
many things. It's not just something that hurts, but other, digestive issues,
Mm.
inflammation. There are a bunch of things that through brain mechanisms, your body can change the way it's reacting. You're basically tapping into your ability to heal yourself, which just to me speaks of the power of the brain and the mind and the body and how they're all connected.
Yes, and I don't think we often realize we are our own little pharmacy, right? Like that our brain is in control of, you mentioned opiates, but also all the hormones, right? And there are a couple other major factors that your science, endorphin, dopamine, are those considered hormones? Is that in the hormone category, or is that a different kind of pharmacy that the brain is working with?
Sure. So dopamine is a neurotransmitter, and it can be tricky because hormones would be slow acting throughout the whole body, whereas neurotransmitters are more local and typically referred to between neurons, as opposed to hormones can affect more organs than just within the brain, right? So
Oh,
that would
okay,
be kind
okay.
of that distinction between neurotransmitters and hormones. But dopamine is the reward chemical is a way to talk about it.
Yeah.
Dopamine isn't about having, it's about wanting. It's the
Oh,
I want the thing. And so when dopamine is released, particularly in reward areas of your brain, something called the ventral striatum, which I talk about in the book, when dopamine is released there, you feel a sense of reward and you want more of it. So an example I give in the book, the first time you have a particular flavor of Ben and Jerry's ice cream, if you like it, you'll get a hit of dopamine. And then in the future, if someone simply mentions that flavor, Chunky Monkey or whatever it might be, you go like, ooh, and you'll get a little hit of dopamine, the anticipation of like, ooh, I want, I do want, please, yes.
yeah.
And so
Yeah,
that
I
would
think
be the.
everybody can relate to that. That's a great example.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And getting back to the doctor's office, so what the research shows there is that when Dan Bowling, he's a researcher at Stanford, one of his hypotheses is that when we're with a doctor that we trust and we think is competent and is warm and friendly, smiles at you, doesn't just look at their computer, but is friendly with you, what the research is showing is that there's a release of oxytocin in the
Mm.
presence of a doctor that we like and trust. And through a chain reaction, oxytocin can lead to a release also of these endogenous opioids. And so when you're with a doctor that you like and trust and is warm, your body begins to feel better. And in fact, not just in the office, but you leave that doctor's office and whatever treatments they prescribe, each time you revisit, oh, this is the pill I'm taking from that doctor that I trust, that medication will be more effective than if it was like, yeah, I don't know, should I really be taking this medication? Right? And you look at the list of side effects,
Yes.
you're like, maybe I really shouldn't be. That medication is going to be less effective from a doctor that you don't trust.
That is just amazing to me.
It
That's
is.
just amazing that you, so I mean, I think that's one of the lessons there. So if we're thinking of it as, you know, these are ways to improve your life,
Yes.
right? Is to seek out in medical care, especially environments from the first person that greets you. They know your name, or they definitely, you're here for this appointment, and I know what a competency level
Yes.
in the office. And if you don't feel that, seek something else out, right? Seek someone else out, because you could potentially amplify positive effects just by having
Exactly.
those feelings. I think that is just great advice, very practical. And
And
almost it could be like you can expand that into lots of other areas of your life, not just the doctor patient, really, right?
right, because oxytocin is released, well, researchers find spending a couple of minutes interacting with your dog, playing with your dog, cuddling your dog releases oxytocin. Maybe it happens with cats too. I'm not sure cats stick around as long for everyone.
My cat, my cat triggers oxytocin. I'm going to go with that. Yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I get
I've
a
had.
lot of joy out of petting that cat. And honestly, you know what it is a cat has that, a dog wags its tail, interacts with you positively by saying, I'm so grateful for you wagging the tail.
Yeah,
A cat has
exactly.
that purr, and there's something physical about petting a cat that's purring that makes
Oh,
you, yeah, I think that's fascinating. Interacting with your pet can produce that.
can produce that. And then, it's hard to, and I said Dan Bowling and his colleagues have hypothesized this. It's hard to measure oxytocin. It's hard to get biochemical markers in a brief interaction, right? If walking into a doctor's office, they can't rush in and take a quick sample of like, oh, are you releasing oxytocin? It's too complicated. But this is the hypothesis that the same thing happens when you're interacting with someone that's really close to you. They have done studies with moms and their infants
Sure.
that oxytocin is released in both directions, that the mom experiences as well as the infant. And the hypothesis is this is true in interactions with other people that you're close to and that make you feel good. So you get this wonderful combination, it's actually called the social pleasure pathway, where you get
Oh,
opioids, you get the endogenous opioids, you get dopamine, and you get oxytocin, all three of those when you're with someone that you like and trust. And so it does have nice implications for how hard isolation can be on people, as well as
mm.
how rewarding it can be to be with people that you can relax with and feel close and cozy with.
That is an excellent point, that on the flip side of all the
Mm,
positive we were just talking about is that loneliness is painful.
exactly.
Yeah.
It can make
Yeah.
pain worse, right? Yeah, it just makes me really feel, and they find that life expectancy for people
Sure.
who,
Yeah, I've heard
you
that
know,
too, that now they're drawing in longevity studies of people that live a really long life. They have solid relationships they have, and
exactly.
that's all connected.
Yes, whether or not they're a widow or widower, they still have a strong sense of social ties in their community. And so, yeah, wherever you're at in life, building it takes time to build community and connections, but that that
Yeah,
that is worth it, not just for your everyday mood, but for your long-term health.
I love that. So in a completely different chapter,
Sure.
there is this idea that fright or being afraid, and we're talking about a completely different emotion than trust and competency and feeling
Mhm.
secure and hearing my cat purr, but that,
Right.
can you talk about how fright has some positive impact? The scare tactic is right. Like I thought that was really fascinating. Tell me a little bit about that.
I find this fascinating too. So, one of the things that happens when you're frightened or you feel threatened, and I don't mean long-term threat, but some emergent threats that just happened, is that you'll release a shot of adrenaline. And so, let's say, we've had the maybe you've had the experience of a surprise party, and that frightens you a bit, and you remember exactly what it was like to walk into that room, of seeing all
Yes.
those people, the lights come on, the faces you see first. One of the things that's happening there is when we're frightened or we feel a sense of jolting threat, is that shot of adrenaline basically improves your ability to hold on to the memories of what happened right at that moment and in the moments preceding it. And
Oh,
so it basically, you can scare yourself into having a memory. And what's interesting about that is it won't improve your memory for things that happen later. And it improves things for things that happen right before you were afraid or the moment that you were frightened. And the reason, in terms of, we think of evolutionary psychology, this makes sense because one of the things we're all trying to do is make predictions about our environments. So
mm.
if you walk into your bathroom in the middle of the night, turn on a bathroom light, and you see a big spider, you want to remember what was happening right before you saw that spider, right? Right? You want to know,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
bathroom was I in? Were you camping in a cabin and you went out to use the latrine, right? What were all the events preceding that, so you can avoid that terrifying spider in the
Yes.
future? Whereas remembering things that happen after that moment, probably not as important. You want to be able to predict the scary event so you can avoid it going forward. And so people will say this, from a car accident perspective, is something traumatizing like that. They'll have all these detailed memories of everything that happened right before the car accident. It feels like time slowed down, right? Because they've got
Right, right.
all these detailed memories of the car coming towards them and them screeching on the brakes. And basically, all those memories are being filed away so you can avoid it in the future, but it can make it feel like time slowed down.
Yes, that's very relatable, I think. And the idea that you can, because our memories are, to me, memory feels malleable, right?
Yeah,
And when
sure.
I'm remembering something from the past now, well, I was just actually, we were just talking about it over the weekend for Father's Day. We were saying
Mm,
my memories of a specific event
yes.
are different in my children's childhood, say, are different than their memories of that event. And so to me, memory is this mushy thing. But that particular study, that research that you were talking about in this chapter about fright, had to do with, so there is a brain chemistry, there's a chemical release that that can bring things into focus very
Yes.
sharply.
Yes.
That was fascinating to me. And fortunately, I haven't had a lot of really terrifying things happen in my life. So maybe
Glad.
none of my memories are super sharp. But you gave some practical tips about it. Like there was something about watching a scary movie even.
Yes, right. So if you know you're going to have an experience, so you can use this to your advantage. If you know you're going to have an experience where you want to hold on to the memory vividly. So let's say you are going to go into a meeting where you are going to meet a lot of people. You want to make sure you hold on to their names, but
Yeah.
you know that this is hard for you. The book talks about some different memory tricks you can use in the moment to hold on to those names. But if you know that, like, okay, I'm going to be in that half an hour meeting, I'm going to meet at least 20 people. I hope I hold on to at least 10 of their names. A thing that you could do is as soon as you sit back down at your desk after the meeting, watch a scary movie clip. Find YouTube, just ask scary movie clip, YouTube, you can put whatever filters on it you would want.
Yeah.
For me, non-violent. I don't mind scary. I don't like violent. But
Yeah.
do do that, and it will solidify things that happen just preceding watching that clip. So you can scare yourself into holding on to memories. What they'll do in the lab is they'll just give you a shot of adrenaline, right? And
Ah.
so, but that's not accessible to most of us. So.
I thought it was a really fascinating idea, and it made. I think that's the other thing that I really do like about all of these chapters, about all of these concepts that you're trying to share, is that I was like, oh, well, that makes sense. Or it's the way you sort of conversationally bring the science into an everyday situation, that it's kind of cool the way that the science is catching up with maybe not necessarily old wives' tales, but things that
Mm,
we think of as like, oh, well, that makes sense. It's kind of neat to know the
yes,
chemistry behind that, right?
exactly.
And then you
Right.
feel more powerful. That information then makes you feel that being informed about that, I don't know, gives you the opportunity to use those things to your advantage instead of just feeling like you're along for the ride with your
Right.
brain
Well,
doing whatever it wants at any time.
well, and it's kind of funny because someone asked me recently, which findings are people most surprised to hear? And I had to think about it because what I find more often is people are surprised how effective the strategies are. I think I've done a
Mm,
good job of explaining them in such a friendly, accessible way that people aren't surprised to hear it because, like, oh, that makes sense. And like you said, it kind of fits with some intuitions I had. But then when you try a technique and you're like, wait, that really worked. You're like, I expected it to kind of work, but it's much more effective than I thought. I find that reassuring when I hear that back. People email me later, like, I can't believe it. There's a chapter on getting focused, and I
yeah.
was consulting with someone who's a coach of a Division 1 college swim team. Anyway, he's often on the bus after a meet, needing to send a bunch of emails, and it's always a cacophony. You can imagine a bunch of swimmers coming back from a meet, whether it went well or didn't go well. It's going to be loud. He's never been able to focus very effectively, and in our consulting work, I taught him some techniques, and he emailed me on a Monday saying it worked. He's like, it was
It worked.
as though the whole bus disappeared around me. So I think
Wow.
people are delighted when these things are more powerful than they expect.
Okay, so who doesn't want a technique that will help them focus while they're surrounded by distractions and noise? Let's pause in the chat with Therese and listen to this particular focus tip. There are many in the audiobook. This strategy feels especially relevant because it's a listening hack. Maybe you've already heard of it. It's about gaining focus by using headphones and listening to something called binaural beats. Binaural beats. This is from Sharp, 14 Simple Ways to Improve Your Life with Brain Science by Therese Houston, narrated by me, edited by Corey Stevenson, and produced by Pete Cross, and published by Dreamscape Media. The next strategy comes straight from the archives of the weird. But after reading the research, I've tried it many times, and it consistently zips up my focus immediately. You're going to listen to something called binaural beats. If you're an etymology buff, you're already guessing this word refers to two sounds or two ears, binary plus aural. And in both cases, you'd be correct. Here's the idea. You put on headphones or earbuds and listen to two different tones played simultaneously. One ear hears a tone at one frequency, while your other ear listens to a sound that's at a slightly lower frequency. It might seem like it should be annoying to hear two different tones played simultaneously, but surprisingly, it's not. Your brain automatically subtracts one tone from the other, and what you actually hear is a third tone. That's the difference between the two. So, if one ear is listening to a tone at 450 hertz and the other is listening to a tone at 410 hertz, the resulting tone is 40 hertz. 450 minus 410 equals 40. The experience? It's like listening to a steady humming noise, like a machine in the background. It's not particularly catchy or interesting, which is a good thing because you don't want it to distract you. Instead of grabbing your attention, the sound should allow you to direct your focus where you want it. Scientists are finding that listening to binaural beats has a variety of cognitive benefits, and one of the most consistent is that it helps people create a spotlight of attention. When these beats are playing, people find it easier to move their attentional spotlight where they want it, while distractions fade into the background. So, you should be less tempted by your Amazon cart and Slack channels, and your mind shouldn't wander as much.
Well, so one of the wives' tales is that laughter is good medicine.
Yes.
And does science hold that up?
It is. It's so interesting. So first of all, it's a great medicine because there are no negative side effects.
Yeah.
With so many medicines,
Yeah,
right?
there's not a list of things also causes XYZ that don't sound so good. Yeah, that's a good
Exactly.
point. I
It's
like
kind
that.
of a humorous little positive effect there. But there actually is fascinating research on the benefits of laughter. So first of all, it creates vasodilation, which might sound bad, but basically it's opening up your blood vessels. And as a result, it can help lower blood pressure. So
Oh.
laughter is good for that. Laughter is also good for, this is going to be a weird one, but it increases pain tolerance, which you might think, I don't want to increase my pain tolerance. But if you ever have to go into a procedure, I sometimes have to have procedures where my husband goes with me because I'm afraid, and he will make jokes. And he's sitting right there with me, and thank goodness he's making jokes. Partly he's distracting me, but also the researchers find on average pain tolerance goes up by about 10% if you're laughing. So you can withstand something that's less comfortable and less pleasant won't be as unpleasant if you're laughing through it, or at least able to
Yeah.
like roll your eyes at the dad joke, but you're at least
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's neat the places that maybe intuition intersect with this supported research and brain science and to me that kind of feels like psychology and brain science sort of coming together, right? Like you were saying, it's part of your
yeah,
background is this some of the it's helping to answer some of the whys that seem
yes,
intuitive, but we don't really know why. And I guess I wondered as you were doing all of the, kind of bringing all of this together and distilling it so that it was really accessible, was there any part of that where you found the most hope, where as research is moving forward, this intersection of psychology and brain science?
what is hopeful to me? I I think one of the things that is hopeful to me is that we are learning so much about the brain that is helpful and can actually help rebuild the brain. So, one of the discouraging things I learned in doing research for the book, this isn't hopeful, but I'll get to the hopeful part in a moment. One of the most discouraging things I learned was that after age 40, there are two brain areas where, on average, we lose 5% of that gray matter every decade after age 40. So it's the
Oh.
prefrontal cortex right behind your forehead, and that's the hippocampus, which is deeper inside the brain. I can't point to it. But the prefrontal cortex is important for emotion regulation and decision making and holding multiple things in mind at once. It's important for inhibiting rather than snapping at someone, you inhibit it and you find a better way to say
Mm.
something. So your prefrontal cortex is key for all of that. And then your hippocampus is important for memory. And you lose 5% every decade. So at 50, you might not notice that's a small amount lost. At 60, you might start finding like, oh, I'm trying to remember that word or someone's name. It's not coming as quickly. That would be because of loss of both of those areas. But by 70, often people are really noticing it. By then, you've lost 15%. But the thing that's hopeful to me, and this is a topic I talk about throughout the book, there are strategies to rebuild those brain areas. So
Mm.
the hippocampus, as far as we can tell, it's the only area where you can add new neurons, and there are ways to do that. And I talk about that in the book. Meditation is one of them, as well as aerobic exercise, as well as the prefrontal cortex. You can't add new neurons there, but you can add new connections. You can just imagine a tree that doesn't have many branches. That would be, at age 70, you've lost some of the branches. The good news is that meditation is one of the things that will rebuild those branches, sprout new branches. And so
Yeah.
to the point where the exercise, even walking, if you're sedentary, moving into walking can basically cancel out. You're adding enough neurons to the hippocampus, it cancels out the loss that of the
Mm.
neurons you're losing. So just being active it's a topic I come back to in multiple ways in the book. But
Yes.
what's good for your heart is basically in most cases good for your brain.
Isn't that's just fascinating, but also so encouraging because I think
It
we
is.
are already, I mean, I kind of see generationally how we're better at paying attention, at least me and my family personally, to the 50s, the 60s, the
Yes.
70s. Like my parents have lived longer than their parents. And
Right.
so it's not just an extension of life. Hopefully, it's an extension of quality of life, right? And that's maybe been
Exactly.
through what we know about diet and exercise. I found it really encouraging that you included things about that in in every chapter of the book, these ideas about movement and meditation, and that you reinforce it kind of every time. It's not just for focus or for memory. It's the positives are across the board, right?
Exactly
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And I think most people think of exercise as something that they do to stave off injury or to,
Yeah.
get their blood pressure down or help with type 2 diabetes. All those things are true, but you can also build a better brain, right? Which all of, dementia, the latest statistics are that for people over 55, there's now a 42% risk of developing dementia at some point in your
Wow.
life. So high, right? I had no idea it was that high. But lots of tips in the book for, okay, how can you reduce that risk? And exercise is a
Preventative,
big one.
preventative,
Preventative.
preventative things. Yes. Yes. And I think err on the side of, do everything within your power, right? I think
Right.
it's easy to feel sort of like some things are inevitable,
They're not.
but it
They're
feels good to be taking some sort of steps. Yeah, I think you do a good job of that in the book. You just mentioned meditation, and it occurred to me while you were saying that is another really big thread or theme throughout all of these chapters, really. Like you circle back to that multiple times. And I found them to be very simple tips. Can you give one or two of the simple sort of exercises in meditation that you recommend in the book?
so my favorite app, and I hadn't discovered this when I wrote the book, but my favorite app would be the Healthy Minds app. I have no connection to it. It's a free app and it's out of University of Wisconsin, but that one's a really
Oh,
nice one. It's developed by the lead scientist is a neuroscientist, so it's especially nice because it's not just someone coming from a let's get healthy perspective, but he's actually a neuroscientist who's saying, all right, let's figure out how to do meditation that has the greatest benefits to brain health. So I really like his work. But in terms of meditation, the kind of the optimal, and I'll tell you, I was just an infrequent meditator before I wrote the book, and now I meditate pretty much every day, at least 5 minutes, usually 10. The
mm,
real brain benefits seem to come at about 10 minutes per day, but at least if you're doing 5 minutes, you've now worked it into your schedule because part of this is just
yes.
how am I going to find time?
Habit
Teresa.
and habit. Yeah, right.
Habit. Exactly.
Creating habit, connecting it to something else you're doing and
Exactly.
building a habit. Yeah.
Yep. The habit stacking. I do it in the morning while I drink my tea, right? So that
Okay.
it's after the first cup, because I'm not quite awake enough before the first cup, but before the second cup, we work in the meditation. So finding a way to work it into your day. And a 10-minute mindfulness meditation, mindfulness is basically just, focusing on something, whether it be your breath, might be something that you're repeating to yourself. I find the guided meditations make it all so much more pleasant because,
Mm,
and by guided meditation, either through an app or through YouTube, you're just listening to something and it's helping you pay attention to your breathing or pay attention
hmm
to part of your body. And it improves focus, it improves memory, and it can help rebuild your brain. So why not? Why not do that?
Why not? Why not? Yeah, why not just try that? I do think it's interesting to me that stillness,
Mm-hmm.
focus on breath, trying to quiet the, I've heard it called the monkey brain, right? The part of your
Yes,
brain that
right.
just blah, 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 blah. That stillness can be beneficial to what we want, what our main goal is of like a really active brain, right? Like we want to be able to
Right.
think quickly and process fast and remember well and speak clearly and be able to find the words that all of that active. And I'm sure there are also benefits to being really active, being playing games and all of that
Sure.
good stuff.
Right. Yeah.
But that there's so much benefit in the stillness is a little counterintuitive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that is surprise. It was surprising to me how much how you documented that and then made recommendations for it. I think that's a great takeaway from the book, a nugget of wisdom.
Thank you.
As you were writing and doing, even getting up towards publication, I know there's lots of revisions that happen. Most
Right.
authors I talked to were like, this was a this many year project. And this is I think you're very current. I mean, there were studies that I read that you referenced that I was like, I hadn't heard about this before. So is that challenging to write in this topic because things are moving quickly in that research field?
It is, and it's neuroscience. I mean, there are many fields like this, but in neuroscience, I did a recent search, and I even mentioned this in the book. On a given month, 3,000 to 5,000 new journal articles in neuroscience are published every month. So
Wow.
it's just
Wow.
incredible. Somewhere between, right? That's at least 36,000 articles a year in neuroscience journals. So there's nobody staying on top of it all. And and as a result, things that were taken as truth not that long ago are now under question. Like the amygdala, you might
Yeah.
hear the amygdala as the threat detector of the brain. Like, nope, nope, nope. That we now find that the amygdala gets activated even when people are being rewarded. So it's not
Mm.
just something's wrong, but it's basically now people talk about it as your salience detector. This is important. This is
Ah.
this is worth paying attention to. Your amygdala is like, hey, whatever else you're doing, hey, you come here. I need you to pay attention. Your amygdala is saying is kind of people talk about amygdala hijack, but it's basically saying to other brain areas, hey, we need to be looking at this. Ignore whatever you were doing before.
Mm.
So we are constantly revising what we as neuroscientists were, and so that can make it frustrating for the average consumer, right? You hear one thing
Yes.
and then you hear something, just like the margarine butter debate years ago. Right? Which one's better? I don't know.
Right. Right. Lots of things connected to our health do feel like it's an evolving thing. But that's part of the beauty
Right.
of science, right? We come up with new hypotheses because, well, this is what we've discovered. What else could we ask? What other questions could we ask around what we've just discovered that might lead us to something else? And
Exactly.
so,
Right.
yeah, that's the
Right.
beauty of the scientific method, isn't it?
It
Yeah.
is. It is. And as a result, I try to, I can't stay on top of everything, but I try to pay attention to, if there's a new interesting finding on either a topic in the book, like about tea, trying to stay on top of what are the new findings around tea and what are we
Oh,
learning maybe that doesn't contradict, but that enhances and perhaps will make people even more motivated to consume tea, for example, because that there's great research on that. So it is exciting, but it also can be a little frustrating because I'm sure there will come a time in the near or distant future where something will be wrong in the book simply because like, oh, now neuroscience has proven that we understand that better and here's what was really going on. Hopefully that will be as little as possible, but it
Right.
meant
And way off in the future.
way off in the future. I had very high standards in the book for something to make it, for instance, I don't talk about chocolate in the book because I knew that
Oh,
chocolate had heart benefits, but I wasn't convinced by the cognitive benefits. But I'm reading, there's more recent research from when I stopped putting together studies for the book. There's now research. I'm now convinced. Dark chocolate, lean into it. Good for your brain.
that's good.
It is
That's the
good.
PS. That's the special PS postscript for the listeners then.
There you
Yeah,
go.
I noticed that you 10 years ago had written about specifically about women, how women decide, how women's brains work.
Right.
And I think while this particular Sharp is not necessarily at all focused by gender, I think that as I was reading, do you think you'll return to some of that? Do you think there's room in or are we still in a really big gender gap? Like I feel like in a lot of things with my personal body and my physical place in life right now, and that sometimes I don't feel like the research has been answering questions about women
Yeah.
specifically. And I do think we're different outside of wanting us to be treated equally. I think we're different. I think our bodies and brains, and I think there's an element of difference. Is there science in that's exploring that the way that maybe we're exploring more what's going on during menopause or
Right. Right.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, I'm in my 50s, and so I'm very interested in the brain science around menopause. And
yeah,
what what I find really fascinating in that literature is that certain things that are frustrating have and I think that some doctors at one point, hopefully not your doctor now, but I think some doctors were like, oh, it's all in her head, are now like, oh wait, there's actually a brain mechanism for that. Okay. Oh, that suddenly has real legitimacy. So for instance, brain fog, right? So this
yeah,
idea that so many women experience where it's just like, I'm not thinking as clearly. I can words aren't coming to me as quickly. I feel like I'm not able to make decisions as quickly. They the current hypothesis around that is that for so many women, they don't sleep well at night because they're having hot flashes, night sweats, their sleep is disrupted. And one of
yeah.
the things that happens in good sleep is you have something called glymphatic clearance. Basically, it's clearing out basically your blood vessels in your brain expand so that stuff can be cleared out. But that's
Wow.
only if you get good sleep. If you don't get good sleep, those blood vessels stay constricted and you don't get kind of the junk cleared out. Just picture like a conference room, a really busy conference room at the end of the day, right? There's coffee cups and there's paper, and there's, people threw things away but didn't quite make to the trash can. So it's kind of a mess. And
Yeah.
overnight, you come back the next morning, the cleaning crews come and made it really nice, and you're ready for a fresh day.
Mm,
That's glymphatic clearance. And what they think now is happening is that if you don't get glymphatic clearance, it's like it's harder to do your work the next day because all the junk is still there. And over
yes.
time, it can cause real problems if you don't get glymphatic clearance. But in the moment, it means you're just not thinking as clearly. So it's really nice that they're now coming up with what's the brain mechanism behind that.
Mm. Yeah, I love that that is, I feel like that's such a huge issue. And I think it is getting more attention, all of the things related to menopause,
Yes.
brain. But I was reading something about frozen shoulder recently, and I was like, oh my God, I
Ooh.
remember my mother having frozen shoulder for like years. And now that's like, oh, this sort of particular joint issue is connected
Oh,
to a drop in estrogen, is like,
yes.
so I obviously cannot quote the science that I read that in, but there were just, I think there's just more conversation around what is happening in the female body and
Yes.
brain. And I'm encouraged by that. And I
Mhm.
think this idea that in all areas that of research where there has been maybe a lack of that kind of gender focused study, it'd be encouraging if there was more, you know?
I agree. I agree. It's so funny. I'm glad we're talking about this. I listen to a variety of podcasts, and I have a favorite health and fitness podcast. But it's the host is a guy, and most of his guests, unfortunately, are men. And and I sometimes, I go, tisk, great. I'm just like, get more women on your show. But it's kind of funny because he had a famous guest on who's known for his work in sleep, and actually had him on set multiple times, and they were talking about different sleep issues. And I am not kidding, Teresa. They didn't talk about hot flashes once. I'm like, let's talk about this. This is hugely disruptive for half the population and of a certain age.
For many years.
Exactly.
Not some sort of window of like, oh, that happened for 6 months, but that could start when you're 38 and continue until you're 50. And like when you talk about like cumulative effect of that on the brain, that's just, you want to shake somebody. And
you do.
Half the population.
Exactly.
Yes. So, seeking out information specific to women's health, I think, is important. And I appreciated that you had sort of, even 10 years ago, were talking about that in your research and in the way that you were writing about. It was specific to the workplace, I think, that particular book. Yeah.
How women decide. Yep.
Yes. Yeah. So I don't know that we are at a good spot right now with research, in neuroscience or anywhere. I don't know statistically what that is. My instinct says that there's still a big gender gap, that there's still a lot of research that's focused on men, but that maybe is me, just what I consume seems like it's not enough about women.
No, and I think, unfortunately, there was a requirement there for a good number of years that it was required, if you were getting federal funding, for instance, for the National Institute of Health, you had to include women in your research. And that's being changed now, where studies can, that requirement is being removed. So it frustrates me, because I think there was an improvement there for a while, where both with animal studies and with humans, that the research had to be done with women as well. But we can hope that, what's fascinating to me is the number of research studies being done in Asia, in Korea and Japan. A lot of the research that I'm finding fascinating on either menopause or on women's brain health is being done in Korea and Japan. Yeah, isn't that fascinating? They have just I don't know what the gender dynamics are there that reflect that, but increasingly that's where a lot of the great research is being done on women's health.
Yes, it's a small planet after all, and
it is.
That research will apply to all of us as well. I'm sure.
Exactly. Right.
You benefit from all of that. Yeah, I think it's just, I didn't want to dive into anything too negative, but I am discouraged by funding that's cut in the NIH, or that funding that is being forced through a different lens that, removes any kind of encouragement of gender equity, or even focusing on women, that is so unfortunate, I think, and I hope corrects in some way as the pendulum swings.
Can I share a brief story? Would you mind?
Yeah, of course.
So, we started the conversation talking about placebo effects and the need to find a good doctor. I'll just share a humorous story. So I had a doctor for years who wasn't as competent as I would have liked. He would at the beginning of the appointment, we might talk about one thing, and by the end of the appointment, he would often have forgotten that, like, oh, I need to order those tests for you. So, but he was easy to get an appointment with, and he was always very supportive of directions I wanted to pursue for different tests, right? So fabulous, right? In terms of, like, he was responsive in that regard. So I kept seeing him, even though sometimes I'd have a bit of an eye roll of like, why can't you remember from the beginning of the appointment to the end? But Teresa, the funniest story, I was having problems with my menstrual cycle, and I went to him. I was going to see my OBGYN as well, but I had to wait. The appointment couldn't happen right away. So I'm seeing him about my concerns. And as I'm describing the problem to him, I'm not kidding, he said to me, "How is your husband about this?" And I said, "He's concerned." And he said, he's such a good guy. My husband also happened to be one of his patients. And I was just like, yes, he is. Now,
Oh my God.
back to my problem. Like, oh my God, that should have been the sign to me that I needed a new doctor.
Red flag.
Red
Red
flag.
flag.
If he's more concerned about my husband's experience of my menstrual problems than he is about my.
So it's been so hard on him.
It
It's been
has
so
been so hard.
difficult. I wake up in a hot sweat and it interrupts his sleep.
Exactly.
I'm glad you brought that up. I really, yeah. What?
I know. But here's what's amazing is that even though that had happened, I still kept going to him because if I needed an appointment and needed a flu shot tomorrow, I could get in to see him, right?
Yes.
Right. But once I did the research on you need to have a doctor you think is competent. I was like, okay,
Yes.
I need a new primary care physician, and I have a new doctor that I love now. But it
Yes.
was writing that chapter that convinced me that the change had to happen.
That's amazing.
It is.
Yes, I do think sometimes we also get stuck in patterns. And even when we know better, it's hard for us to shift gears and come out of a pattern that we've been in. And yeah, that's a great story. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that because I think most women do have most women, I'm also in my 50s, mid 50s, and my experience with menopause was that I had to change doctors to be heard
Yes.
about it, and eventually did hear something other than, well, that's normal. That's normal. That's normal. And I ended up having the reason I had an MRI was I had thyroid cancer, but I didn't know I
Oh,
had thyroid cancer. So
sure.
all of these symptoms that were thyroid related were happening as I was sort of going off a cliff of estrogen and testosterone. And it kind of got, I think, misdiagnosed or just sort of written off of like, I'm so tired, or I just can't, like, anyway, eventually a nurse practitioner said, has anybody done your thyroid labs lately? And I said,
Right.
no, I don't know. Because palpating, you couldn't feel anything.
Couldn't, right. There was no lump. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, the labs were gross. The labs were way over here. And she was like,
Okay.
okay, and we'll do another test in 3 weeks or so. Maybe it was a month.
Right.
So they did blood work and then blood work again. And then that time it was over here. It was sort of swinging back and forth. And that was my experience. I'd be like, well, it kind of comes and goes. And
Right.
yeah. And I think my menopause experience so far was clouded by this other medical condition that was hiding underneath it, that just required somebody to really be listening to me.
Yes.
And the fact that a nurse practitioner was like, wait a minute, how long has this been going on? And
Yeah.
well, that's not. And I think that we often don't know how to ask for labs, right? Like that
Right.
I didn't know that something other than my cholesterol and for
Right.
diabetes should be being
Sure.
checked. And I don't think it was until I went in to see an OB who does HRT things that she was like, well, let's look and see where you are. Let's see what this looks like.
Right.
Where is your
Right.
estrogen? And we can supplement that. We can help you. And let's see how this makes you feel. And I was like, oh, like, are you kidding? That's amazing. That was mind blowing. Really made a difference for me. I feel a lot better. But anyway,
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so glad you had a doctor who had curiosity, right? Who was just like,
yes,
I
yes.
let's just look
Listening.
to
Mm.
listen, both listening and curious. Like, well, let's just look. Do you mind if we look around a little more? Because I want you to feel comfortable, and I want to be comfortable that we've checked all the boxes.
Yeah. Yeah. So my notes say I've asked you everything and I've kept you for almost an hour. Thank you so much. The last thing I do like to ask is the name of the podcast is Desideratum, which is Latin for the desire for things that are essential. It's born out of this poem called Desiderata that was hanging on the wall when I was a little girl. It reminds me a little bit of the bit of wisdom you gave at the beginning about finding your calling and how your calling lines up in the universe. One of the lines in Desiderata is, you are a child of the universe, no less than the trees and the stars. And whether or not it is clear to you, the universe is unfolding as it should. So there's a lot of life wisdom in it. So when I talk to authors, one of my ideas when I first started doing this was, I just want to talk about things that are essential, things we desire as essential. And I think your book is full of these great tips for people to tap into how to be essentially better, to be the best versions of themselves. And, but I wanted to give you a chance to talk about that. So for you, what is, and you could answer it as a scientist or as an author or just as a person, what do you feel like is most essential?
I would say for me, the two things that strike me as essential is one, movement. I start my day, like I said, with a cup of tea and a meditation, but I'll often do a walking meditation movement. And I live in Seattle where it rains a lot. It's important to move. For
Yeah.
me, it really allows for me to have a better day. On days when I have long flights and I can't move much, I feel out of sorts. So I would say movement is essential. And the other thing that's essential is affection. I'm very fortunate to have an affectionate dog and an affectionate husband, and just to have physical bodies that I can be close to. And whether that's even just sitting side by side on the couch, that that makes life wonderful.
I love that. I love how both of your answers were very physical. And this
They
is a
are.
book about the brain, but
Yeah.
I love that. That was really good. Thank you so much. And thanks for giving me an hour of your day. Was there anything I didn't ask you that you think is important to talk about or that you want me to talk about?
No, you were lovely, and
Okay, okay, good.
thank you. Yeah.
I'm really happy
Okay.
our paths crossed. I'm really glad I was
Likewise.
involved in this project. It was great. It was perfect timing, and it was so nice of Pete to even reach out and consider me for it. So I felt
Nice.
really lucky to be part of it.
Kind of funny because I think there were 5 auditions that I got sent at least, and yours was the clear standout, and it was cute because you were Pete's preference as well.
Oh, wow.
So
That's really nice. That's really nice to hear, actually.
yeah,
That's a nice compliment because
and you did a
he's
wonderful
a
job.
talented, yeah, he's very talented himself. And so it's good. And I respect him a lot in the industry. It's an ever-changing and evolving sort of business. And so it's always nice to be aligned with people that also care really deeply about what they're doing,
I hear you. Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you.
So it's great to
Likewise.
meet you in person. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you, Teresa. Thanks for holding such a wonderful conversation.
I hope that you enjoyed getting to know Therese Houston as much as I did. And I hope that you can't wait to access the rest of the audiobook, all of these practical and specific techniques that she gives in sharp 14 ways to improve your life with brain science. I'm going to put a link to the audiobook on Libro.fm in the show notes and on my website. When you purchase your audiobooks with Libro.fm, you can choose a local to you bookstore to support with every purchase. And when you use my affiliate link, you also support this podcast. Another thank you to this episode's sponsor, the audio prepping and proofing software subscription service, Pozotron. I use Pozotron on every single audiobook project I do. Finally, I'm going to put a link to an interview with the American author and the deep thinker, the late Reverend Frederick Buechner, who Teresa quoted at the very beginning of this episode as defining a person's calling as the place where your deep gladness meets the world's hunger. The enlightening profile and interview that I found with Buechner was produced by PBS in Vermont in 2006. The public broadcasting system has been feeding my curiosity and helping me find answers and inspiration for as long as I can remember. I hope that, like me, you will find ways to support PBS and NPR at your local level. As always, thanks for being here, and thanks for listening.